The ultrasound image appears on the screen at exactly 2:17 p.m., grainy black and white pixels forming the unmistakable shape of a 14-week fetus. Dr. Sarah Hassan freezes mid-sentence, her professional smile faltering as she studies the monitor with the kind of attention that makes patients nervous. Behind her, seated on the examination table with her shirt pulled up to expose her still flat belly, 26-year-old Maria Teresa Cruz feels her heart begin to race. "You didn't mention you were pregnant," Dr. Hassan says carefully, her tone walking the line between medical observation and personal judgment that doctors learn to navigate in Dubai, where pregnancies outside marriage can mean deportation or worse. "I didn't know," Maria whispers, though even as she says it, she realizes it's a lie. She'd known. The missed periods, the morning nausea she'd attributed to stress, the tenderness in her breasts that no amount of denial could explain away. She'd known, and she'd ignored it because acknowledging the pregnancy meant acknowledging everything else. The affair, the deception, the impossibility of her situation. Dr. Hassan's eyes move from the monitor to Maria's face, conducting a different kind of examination. "The father," she says quietly, "does he know?" Maria's silence is answer enough, because the father is Sheikh Tariq al-Rashid, 42 years old, married with 4 children, and one of Dubai's most prominent real estate developers. A man whose family name appears on hospital wings and university buildings. A man who could never, would never, acknowledge a child conceived with his Filipina housemaid. But what neither of them knows yet, what won't be discovered until the DNA test results arrive 3 days later, is that this pregnancy will trigger a chain of events so calculated and cruel that it will redefine Maria's understanding of how far powerful men will go to protect their reputations. Because Sheikh Tariq won't deny the child. He'll do something far worse. He'll ensure it exists under someone else's name, forcing Maria into a marriage designed to erase his paternity while keeping his biological child within his control. This is the story of how a pregnancy became a prison, how love, if you can call it that, became a weapon, and how a woman who thought she understood the rules of survival in Dubai discovered those rules could be rewritten in ink mixed with blood and tears. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear will shatter everything you think you know about the invisible chains that bind domestic workers in the Gulf, about the lengths wealthy men will go to protect family honor, and about the trafficking that happens not across borders, but within the marble walls of luxury villas where no one can hear you scream. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button now, because this story goes to places that will make you question whether the glittering towers of Dubai are monuments to progress or tombstones marking where dignity went to die. Maria Teresa Cruz had arrived in Dubai on February 14, 2022, which she'd taken as a good omen until she understood that Dubai didn't care about omens, only contracts. The employment agreement she'd signed in a Manila recruitment office had promised a salary of 1,200 dirhams monthly, about $325 USD, to work as a domestic helper for a respectable Emirati family. What it hadn't mentioned was that she'd be working 18-hour days with no days off, sleeping in a storage room that barely fit a mattress, or that her passport would be confiscated the moment she arrived. The Al-Rashid household occupied a sprawling villa in Emirates Hills, Dubai's most exclusive neighborhood where property values started at $10 million and climbed from there. The house itself was a monument to wealth that had lost all connection to taste. Italian marble floors that required daily polishing, crystal chandeliers in every room including bathrooms, gold fixtures that needed constant cleaning to maintain their garish shine. Sheikh Tariq's wife, Sheikha Layla, ran the household with the kind of rigid control that came from having too much money and too little purpose. She was 40 years old but looked older, her beauty preserved through expensive procedures that left her face smooth but somehow lifeless. She'd given Tariq 4 children, 3 daughters, and finally a son, which had secured her position but not her happiness. The marriage was traditional, arranged when she was 19 and he was 26, built on family alliances rather than affection. Maria's duties were endless and specific. She woke at 5 a.m. to prepare the family's elaborate breakfast. She cleaned 12 bathrooms, 8 bedrooms, 3 living areas, and a kitchen larger than her family's entire house in Quezon City. She served meals, did laundry by hand because the Sheikh didn't trust machines with expensive fabrics, ironed everything including bedsheets, and remained available until midnight in case anyone needed anything. The other staff, a Pakistani driver, an Indian gardener, and a Sri Lankan cook, had warned her during her first week. "Don't ever be alone with the Sheikh," the cook had said, her eyes carrying the weight of knowledge earned through others' suffering. "These men, they think we're included in what they own." Maria had nodded, understanding the warning but believing she'd be different. She was plain, she told herself, not the kind of woman who attracted that kind of attention. She kept her eyes down, her hair covered, her body hidden under shapeless uniforms. She would be invisible, and invisibility was safety. She was wrong on every count. Sheikh Tariq had noticed her immediately, though he'd been patient in his approach. For the first 3 months, his interaction with Maria was limited to brief instructions delivered without eye contact, maintaining the appropriate distance between master and servant. But he was studying her, learning her patterns, identifying her vulnerabilities the way a predator maps prey. The approach began in late May, during Ramadan when the household dynamics shifted. Sheikh Layla had taken the children to her family's palace in Abu Dhabi for the final weeks of the holy month, leaving Sheikh Tariq alone in Dubai to manage his business obligations. The other staff had been given time off, their duties reduced during the fasting hours. Maria was effectively alone in the house with Sheikh Tariq for the first time. It started with small kindnesses that felt like miracles after months of being treated as invisible. Sheikh Tariq asked about her family, learning that she was sending money home to support her mother and 3 younger siblings after her father's death. He inquired about her education, discovering she'd completed 2 years of university before poverty had forced her to quit and seek work abroad. "You're too intelligent to be cleaning toilets," he'd said one evening, his voice carrying what seemed like genuine regret for her circumstances. "In another life, another place, you could have been anything." The words had landed on Maria's starved soul like water on cracked earth. No one in Dubai had ever acknowledged her humanity, much less her potential. She'd been the maid for so long she'd almost forgotten she'd once been a person with dreams. The gifts came next. A new phone to replace her broken one, presented as a practical necessity so she could video call her family. Books in English, because he'd noticed she read during her rare moments of rest. A small electric fan for her storage room, because he'd observed how the heat made sleeping difficult. Each gift came with assurances that he expected nothing in return, that this was simply the obligation of a good Muslim to care for those in his household. And Maria, desperate to believe in kindness, chose to accept these explanations. The physical relationship began on a Friday night in early June. Sheikh Tariq had called Maria to his private study, ostensibly to discuss adding duties while his wife was away. But when she arrived, he'd been drinking whiskey, forbidden during Ramadan, but men like him considered rules optional, and his mood had shifted into something Maria recognized too late as dangerous. "You're lonely here," he'd said, his voice soft but his body blocking the door. "I see it in your eyes. You miss home, miss being touched with kindness, miss feeling like a woman instead of a servant." "I should go," Maria had said, fear finally overriding the false comfort his earlier kindness had created. "Should you?" His hand had caught her wrist, not painfully but firmly enough to communicate that leaving was no longer her choice. "I could make your life very difficult, Maria, or I could make it easier, much easier, help with your family's debts, arrange better positions for your siblings. The choice is yours, but understand, there's always a choice and choices have consequences." What happened next wasn't violent in the way Maria had imagined assault would be. There was no screaming, no physical struggle. Instead, there was the kind of coercion that left no visible bruises but destroyed something fundamental nonetheless. The coercion that came wrapped in financial threats and false promises, that transformed survival instincts into what would later be called consent by men who needed that word to sleep at night. Afterward, Sheikh Tariq had been gentle, almost tender. "This doesn't have to be shameful," he'd whispered, stroking her hair as she lay rigid beside him. "We can care for each other. I'll protect you, provide for you. You'll never have to worry about money again." And so began an arrangement that Maria told herself was her choice, even as every cell in her body screamed that choice required options she didn't possess. She became Sheikh Tariq's secret companion, summoned to his study or bedroom whenever his wife was absent, her body and time now serving purposes her employment contract hadn't specified, but that her lack of options made inevitable. The affair, if it could be called that, continued for 8 months. Sheikh Tariq was careful, maintaining appearances, ensuring Maria's duties remained unchanged so household staff wouldn't suspect. He was generous in ways that felt like affection, bonus payments that helped her family buy a new roof for their house, arrangements for her youngest sister to attend a better school, promises of helping her return to university someday when circumstances allowed. Maria learned to dissociate during their encounters, to separate her mind from her body, to exist in the strange space between victim and participant that women throughout history have occupied when survival depends on pleasing powerful men. She told herself she was being practical, strategic, even smart. She ignored the voice that whispered she was being destroyed one consensual encounter at a time. The pregnancy shouldn't have been possible. Sheikh Tariq had assured her he was being careful, that he knew what he was doing, that she shouldn't worry. But bodies don't respect promises, and biology doesn't care about power dynamics. By December, Maria was pregnant with a child that couldn't exist without destroying everything Sheikh Tariq had spent his life building. When she'd finally confirmed the pregnancy at a clinic far from her neighborhood, paying cash so there'd be no insurance records, Maria had felt a strange mixture of terror and relief. Terror at the impossible situation, but relief that there would finally be consequences for what had been done to her, that the affair conducted in shadows would have to acknowledge itself in daylight. She'd been catastrophically naive about what men like Sheikh Tariq did when consequences threatened their carefully constructed lives. Maria waited 3 days after the clinic confirmation before telling Sheikh Tariq, choosing a moment when his wife and children were at a family wedding in Sharjah. She'd rehearsed what she'd say, how she'd frame it, imagining scenarios that ranged from him offering marriage unlikely, but she let herself dream, to him arranging a quiet abortion in a private clinic where money bought both procedure and silence. What she didn't anticipate was the expression that crossed his face when she spoke the words, "I'm pregnant." Not anger or fear, but something colder and more calculated. The look of a man doing complex mathematics in his head, weighing variables and calculating optimal solutions. "How far along?" he asked, his voice professionally detached, as though discussing a business problem rather than a human life. 14 weeks, Maria answered. "The ultrasound." "You had an ultrasound?" His interruption was sharp. "Where? Which hospital?" "A private clinic in Dera. I paid cash. I didn't use any insurance or—" "Names," he demanded. "Did you give them your real name, your employer's name?" Maria's stomach clenched as she realized his primary concern wasn't her well-being or even the baby's existence, but whether anyone could trace the pregnancy back to him. "I used a fake name," she whispered. "I said I was married, that my husband was traveling for work." Sheikh Tariq's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Good, that's good." He paced his study, the same room where their affair had begun, his mind clearly working through possibilities. "An abortion is the obvious solution. I know a doctor in Abu Dhabi, very discreet. He handles these situations for families in our circle. It's painless, quick, and completely untraceable." "No," Maria said, the word surprising her as much as him. She'd expected to agree immediately, to accept termination as the only logical path, but something in her rebelled against erasing this child to preserve his convenience. "I can't. It's not just religious. I just can't." "You mean you won't," Sheikh Tariq corrected, his tone hardening. There's a difference, Maria. Can't implies impossibility, won't implies choice. And I need you to understand very clearly that this isn't a situation where you have choices. I could leave, Maria said, though even as she spoke she understood how hollow the threat was. Go back to the Philippines, have the baby there. With what money? Sheikh Tariq asked, his voice almost gentle in its cruelty. I have your passport. Your ticket home would cost more than you've saved. And even if you somehow made it back to Manila, what then? You'd arrive pregnant and unmarried in a Catholic country that would mark you as a whore and your child as a bastard. Your family would be ruined by association. Is that really better than a simple medical procedure? The trap he'd constructed over 8 months of manipulation closed completely. Maria had no money beyond what he controlled. Her passport was locked in his safe. Her visa was tied to employment that he could terminate with a phone call. Her family's improved circumstances, the new roof, the better school, the hope for university, all depended on money that flowed from his accounts. She had no leverage, no options, no power beyond the biological fact growing in her womb. There's another option, Sheikh Tariq said after a long silence, his tone suggesting he'd just thought of it, though Maria would later realize he'd been calculating this possibility since her first sentence. You could marry someone. Marry? The suggestion was so unexpected that Maria actually laughed, the sound brittle and slightly hysterical. Who would marry a pregnant housemaid? Someone who needs what I can provide, Sheikh Tariq replied. Someone whose desperation exceeds yours. Someone who will understand that this arrangement benefits everyone if handled correctly. Over the next 10 minutes, as Dubai's afternoon heat baked the villa's marble exterior, Sheikh Tariq outlined a plan so calculated in its cruelty that Maria felt her understanding of human depravity fundamentally recalibrated. He had a driver, Hassan Ahmad, a Pakistani man in his 50s whose work visa was expiring, and who faced deportation back to Karachi where debt and family dishonor awaited him. Hassan needed visa renewal urgently, but his employment status had been complicated by a minor legal issue, a traffic accident where he'd been partially at fault, creating liability that made most employers reluctant to sponsor him. Sheikh Tariq could solve Hassan's problems with a single phone call, clear his legal issues, secure a new employment visa, even provide a cash payment that would eliminate his family's debt. In exchange, Hassan would marry Maria, claim paternity of her child, and provide legal cover for a pregnancy that couldn't be associated with the Al-Rashid family. It's perfect, Sheikh Tariq explained, his enthusiasm for his own cleverness almost making him seem warm again. Hassan gets to stay in Dubai and save his family. You get a husband, which makes your pregnancy socially acceptable and keeps you employed. The child gets a father of record, and I get. To erase yourself completely, Maria finished, understanding finally crystallizing. The DNA, the baby's genetics, everything that would prove you're the father gets buried under Hassan's name. Exactly, Sheikh Tariq agreed. My family never knows. My wife's reputation stays intact. You and your child are provided for. Everyone wins. Except I'm forced into marriage with a stranger, Maria said, and my child grows up believing someone else is their father. Your child grows up fed, educated, and cared for, Sheikh Tariq corrected, instead of being the bastard of a housemaid who got deported and ended up in Manila's slums. Context matters, Maria. In the real world, compromise is survival. The most horrifying part was that he wasn't entirely wrong. Maria ran through her actual options and found them all variations of disaster. Abortion violated beliefs she couldn't simply logic away. Deportation meant returning to poverty more absolute than what she'd fled. Single motherhood in Dubai was illegal. She'd be jailed and then deported anyway. The forced marriage was a trap, but it was a trap lined with silk compared to the alternatives available to women with no power, no money, and no rights in a country that viewed them as disposable labor. I need to think, Maria whispered, though she already knew her thinking would lead nowhere new. You have 24 hours, Sheikh Tariq replied. After that, I make decisions for you, and trust me, Maria, you'll prefer making this choice yourself. What neither of them knew yet was that the choice was already made. Because that afternoon, while Maria was being presented with her impossible options, Dr. Sarah Hassan was filing her medical records according to Dubai's strict healthcare protocols. And those protocols included mandatory reporting of certain conditions for public health tracking. By the time anyone understood that Maria's pregnancy had been documented in systems beyond anyone's control, it would be too late to make it simply disappear. The consequences would metastasize from private crisis into something far more dangerous for everyone involved. Hassan Ahmad had been driving for wealthy Dubai families for 23 years, watching from the front seat as they lived lives of excess he couldn't comprehend. He'd ferried children to private schools that cost more per year than his annual salary. He'd waited outside restaurants where single meals exceeded his monthly earnings. He'd maintained professional invisibility while his employers discussed him as though he couldn't understand English, which he spoke fluently along with Urdu, Arabic, and passable Hindi. At 54, Hassan had accepted that this was his life's ceiling. His own children had grown up in Karachi, raised by relatives, while he sent money home, watching them age through video calls and annual visits that never felt long enough. His wife had died 3 years ago from an illness that better medical care might have treated, but Pakistani hospitals weren't built for the poor. Now he faced deportation over a traffic accident where a young Emirati had run a red light, but Hassan's legal status made him the liable party regardless of fact. His visa sponsor had dropped him rather than deal with complications. He had 60 days before deportation to Pakistan, where his brother's debt collectors would be waiting to extract payment for loans that had kept his family housed and fed. When Sheikh Tariq summoned him to discuss a business arrangement that benefits both of us, Hassan had arrived expecting nothing good. Men like Sheikh Tariq didn't help drivers out of kindness. They extracted value from everything, including desperation. The proposal was explained with efficiency that stripped away any pretense of this being anything other than transaction. Hassan would marry Maria, the Filipina housemaid. He would claim paternity of her pregnancy. In exchange, Sheikh Tariq would clear his legal problems, secure a new 5-year employment visa, provide 100,000 dirhams cash, about $27,000 USD, and guarantee employment with a salary increase. "The child isn't mine," Hassan said slowly, understanding dawning. "It's yours." "The child's paternity is irrelevant," Sheikh Tariq replied. "What matters is whose name appears on the birth certificate. That's what determines legal reality." "And Maria, she's agreed to this." "She's agreeing," Sheikh Tariq said, "because she understands, as you do, that in this world we all make choices within the constraints we're given. Her constraints are even narrower than yours." Hassan had met Maria perhaps 20 times over the 2 years they'd both worked for the Al-Rashid family. She was polite, quiet, clearly miserable, but hiding it with the practiced smile that domestic workers learn to maintain. He'd felt sorry for her in the abstract way you feel sorry for anyone trapped in circumstances they didn't choose. "I want to speak with her," Hassan said. "Before I agree to anything, I need to hear from her that this is what she wants." The meeting was arranged for that evening in the villa's service area, the utilitarian space where staff ate meals on floors, while the family dined on crystal and china in rooms they'd cleaned. Maria arrived looking exhausted and frightened, her eyes carrying the particular desperation of someone watching all her options burn. "He told you," she said, not a question but a statement. "He told me his version," Hassan replied. "I want to hear yours." Maria's story came out in fragments. The coercion that had started with kindness and ended in her storage room, the months of exploitation disguised as affair, the pregnancy that couldn't be acknowledged without destroying everything Sheikh Tariq had built. She didn't cry, which somehow made it worse. She just recited facts with the hollow voice of someone who'd already processed that justice wasn't available and survival was the only remaining goal. "He's forcing us both," Hassan said quietly. "You understand that? This marriage would be coercion for both of us." I know, Maria whispered, but his version of force comes with money and visas and future possibilities. The alternative version comes with deportation and ruin. I've learned that there are degrees of trapped, and some cages are bigger than others. They sat in silence, two people from different countries and cultures bound by the common experience of being powerless in a city built on exploitation, where wealth determined reality and the law served those who could afford to rewrite it. If we do this, Hassan said finally, we should at least be honest with each other. This marriage would be paper only. I'm not asking for intimate rights. You've been violated enough by men who claimed ownership of your body. I won't add to that. Fresh tears appeared in Maria's eyes, the first Hassan had seen. Thank you, she whispered. You don't know what it means to hear someone acknowledge what happened to me instead of calling it an affair. I have a daughter your age, Hassan replied. If a man in power did to her what was done to you, I'd want to kill him. Since I can't, the least I can do is offer you marriage without making it another form of assault. The wedding happened 3 days later in a small office where bureaucratic marriage registrations happened in Dubai with efficient absence of ceremony. Maria wore a simple dress. Hassan wore his driving uniform because it was his nicest clothing. Sheikh Tariq's assistant served as witness, ensuring the documentation would be absolutely legitimate and uncontestable. The marriage certificate was signed. Maria's visa status changed from household worker to dependent spouse of Hassan Ahmad. Her pregnancy was now legally attached to her legal husband, creating the paper trail that would obscure Sheikh Tariq's biological reality. That night, Maria moved her few possessions from the storage room to a small apartment Hassan rented in International City, far from the luxury of Emirates Hills but feeling like freedom nonetheless. They had 2 bedrooms, which Hassan insisted on despite the extra cost. You need privacy, he'd said. This marriage is legal fiction, not license for me to intrude on your space. For 2 weeks, the arrangement seemed to work. Maria continued working for the Al-Rashid family, her pregnancy now explained as her husband's child. Sheikh Tariq maintained cold professional distance. Their affair ended as abruptly as it had begun. Hassan drove his new routes, his visa secure and his family's debt paid off by Sheikh Tariq's promised money. But complications were brewing in places none of them could see or control. Because paperwork generates more paperwork, and systems designed to track populations don't allow secrets to hide forever. The call came from Dubai Health Authority 3 weeks after the marriage, a routine inquiry about prenatal care for Maria Ahmad, newly registered dependent spouse. The call went to Sheikh Tariq's villa because Maria's employment records still listed the Al-Rashids as her primary contact, a detail no one had thought to change. Sheikha Layla took the call, listened with growing confusion, then summoned Maria to her private sitting room with fury in her eyes. "You're pregnant?" she demanded, her voice shaking with rage that had nothing to do with morality and everything to do with control being disrupted. "You married my driver while working in my house." "Yes, Sheikha," Maria answered, keeping her eyes down, playing the submissive servant even as her heart raced with fear. "How long have you been sleeping with Hassan under my roof?" The accusation was delivered with absolute certainty that this was deception rather than the legitimate relationship Maria's paperwork claimed. "We married 3 weeks ago," Maria said, sticking to the script she and Hassan had prepared. "The pregnancy is from before the marriage, which is why we married quickly, to make it proper." "Proper?" Sheikha Layla's laugh was bitter. "There's nothing proper about staff conducting relationships while employed in decent households. You're terminated immediately, both of you. Pack your things and leave my home." The termination shouldn't have been devastating. Maria had expected it eventually. But Sheikha Layla wasn't finished. "Before you leave, you'll submit to a medical examination," she announced. "Full STD screening, drug testing, and genetic testing. If you've brought diseases or other problems into my home, I want documentation for my family's protection." "That's not necessary," Maria protested, fear now spiking into panic. "I'm healthy, the baby is healthy." It wasn't a request, Sheikh Layla interrupted. It's a condition of receiving any severance pay or reference letter. Refuse and you leave with nothing, and I'll ensure every recruitment agency in Dubai knows you were terminated for misconduct. The trap had new teeth. Maria couldn't refuse without raising suspicions that would lead exactly where she was trying to prevent. But submitting to genetic testing meant DNA samples would enter systems she couldn't control. She called Hassan, who called Sheikh Tariq, who for the first time since the marriage seemed genuinely worried. "Stall her," he ordered. "Tell her you'll do the testing but need time to arrange it through your own doctor. I'll handle this." But Sheikh Layla was operating on her own suspicions now, convinced that something wasn't right about this sudden marriage and convenient pregnancy. She scheduled the appointment herself at a private medical facility that specialized in genetic testing, paying premium prices for rushed results. Maria submitted to the testing with a sense of inevitability. Hassan accompanied her, holding her hand in a gesture that was more human kindness than husbandly duty. The blood was drawn. The samples were labeled. The paperwork was processed. Results would be available in 72 hours. What happened in those 72 hours would determine whether Sheikh Tariq's carefully constructed cover-up would hold, or whether DNA's fundamental honesty would expose his lies. Sheikh Tariq attempted to bribe the lab technicians, offering money that would have solved all their problems if money solved everything. But medical records in Dubai's modern healthcare system weren't stored only locally. They uploaded to centralized databases automatically, insurance systems that tracked public health metrics, government registries that monitored population genetics. The DNA results, when they came back, revealed exactly what biology demanded. The fetus Maria carried had genetic markers that didn't match Hassan Ahmad's profile. The lab automatically flagged the discrepancy as potential paternity error, standard procedure when DNA results contradicted stated relationships. But the results revealed something else that sent the entire situation spiraling into territory no one had anticipated. The fetal DNA showed markers associated with genetic conditions that ran in certain Arab families, specific mutations that were well documented in medical literature, studying consanguinity and genetic inheritance in Gulf populations. The same markers that appeared in Sheikh Tariq al-Rashid's own medical records, filed years earlier during his premarital genetic screening, required by UAE marriage law. An automated matching algorithm designed to identify genetic relationships for medical purposes flagged the connection. The results were forwarded to a genetic counselor, standard protocol when inherited conditions were identified. And suddenly, what had been a private scandal contained within a household became a medical case that would be documented, analyzed, and potentially investigated, according to Dubai's strict protocols around genetic disorders and family health tracking. Sheikh Tariq discovered the situation had escaped his control when he received a call from the hospital's genetics department asking him to come in to discuss a familial genetic match that requires counseling and documentation. His world didn't crack, it detonated. The meeting in the hospital's genetic counseling office was professional, clinical, and absolutely devastating. Dr. Ahmed Karim, the genetic counselor, explained the situation with the detached precision of someone discussing abstract medical data rather than life-destroying revelations. "We've identified genetic markers in Mrs. Ahmad's fetal testing that match markers in your medical file, Sheikh Tariq," Dr. Karim explained, presenting charts that showed probability analyses. "The likelihood of this being coincidental is less than 0.01%. Our medical obligation is to inform you that you have a genetic relationship with this fetus." "This is absurd," Sheikh Tariq said, but his voice lacked conviction. "There's clearly been some laboratory error. I demand retesting." "We can certainly retest," Dr. Karim replied. "However, I should inform you that our protocols require documenting all genetic relationships, particularly when inherited conditions are involved. The markers we've identified suggest elevated risk for certain metabolic disorders that require monitoring. The genius of medicine's impartiality was that it didn't care about reputation, only about biological truth. The system designed to protect public health was now documenting evidence of Sheikh Tariq's paternity in records that would be permanent and accessible. "What are my options?" Sheikh Tariq asked, the question coming from a place of desperation he'd never inhabited before. "Options?" Dr. Karim seemed confused. "This isn't a situation with options. It's a medical finding that requires appropriate documentation and follow-up care. The child will need genetic counseling and potentially treatment for conditions that run in your family line." "And the mother, Maria Ahmed?" "She'll be informed of the genetic findings and advised about necessary prenatal care," Dr. Karim replied. "And obviously, the documentation will note the discrepancy between stated paternity and genetic findings." Sheikh Tariq left the hospital understanding that his carefully constructed cover-up had failed not because anyone had discovered his affair, but because biology didn't lie and modern medicine documented biological truth with ruthless efficiency. He had 3 choices, all of them catastrophic in different ways. Option 1. Acknowledge paternity, face his wife's fury and potential divorce, accept the social scandal of having fathered a child with a housemaid, but maintain control over the child's future. Option 2. Continue denying paternity despite DNA evidence, fight legal battles that would only publicize the situation further, potentially face fraud charges for arranging a false marriage. Option 3. Make the problem disappear entirely, using methods that couldn't be discussed in civilized company, but that men with his resources had used throughout history. He chose a 4th option, one that combined elements of all 3 while adding new levels of cruelty that even Maria hadn't anticipated. The ultimatum was delivered through his lawyer in Hassan and Maria's small apartment, the space suddenly feeling even smaller with 3 people, and the weight of an impossible choice filling the air. "Sheikh Tariq acknowledges biological paternity," the lawyer began, reading from prepared documents. "However, he maintains that the pregnancy resulted from a single encounter that Mrs. Ahmad initiated and exploited. He's prepared to provide financial support for the child on condition that certain terms are met." The terms were presented in bullet points, each one a dagger wrapped in legal language. 1. Maria would maintain the marriage to Hassan Ahmad and raise the child under his name legally. 2. Sheikh Tariq would provide a trust fund of 2 million dirhams, $545,000 USD, for the child's education and care, accessible only through trustees he controlled. 3. Maria would sign non-disclosure agreements preventing her from ever revealing Sheikh Tariq's paternity to anyone, including the child. 4. Sheikh Tariq would have unofficial access to the child, described as family friend status, allowing him to monitor the child's development without legal responsibility. 5. Any violation of these terms would result in termination of all financial support and potential legal action against Maria for fraud, defamation, and immigration violations that Sheikh Tariq's lawyers would ensure were prosecuted. "And if I refuse?" Maria asked, her voice hollow. "Then you receive nothing," the lawyer replied. "The marriage to Hassan will be investigated as fraudulent. His visa will be revoked. You'll be deported immediately after giving birth in Dubai's public hospital, where your status as unmarried mother will be reported to authorities. Your child will be born in legal limbo, and you'll return to the Philippines with nothing." "He's paying me to disappear his paternity," Maria said, understanding crystallizing. "To raise his biological child under another man's name while he gets to watch them grow up without any legal or social consequences." "He's offering you financial security," the lawyer corrected. "Money that will ensure your child receives education and opportunities you could never provide otherwise. Consider it carefully." Hassan, who'd been silent throughout, finally spoke. "And my role in this?" "You remain married to Maria, at least on paper," the lawyer explained. "Sheikh Tariq will continue employing you with significant salary increase. You'll be the legal father with all responsibilities, but also with financial support that exceeds what most fathers provide. It's not an unfair arrangement." "Except it's built on forced marriage and biological fraud," Hassan replied. "It's built on pragmatic solutions to complicated situations," the lawyer countered. "The alternative is everyone loses. This way, everyone gets something." Maria looked at Hassan, silently asking what he thought. Hassan looked back at her with eyes that had seen too much of life's cruelty to be surprised by more. "It's your choice," Hassan said quietly. "This is your body, your child, your future. I'm just the paper husband providing legal cover. Whatever you decide, I'll support." And there it was, the illusion of choice that was actually a coerced decision dressed up in legal language and financial incentives. Accept Sheikh Tariq's terms and have money but no truth. Refuse and have nothing but honesty that would starve her child. Maria signed the papers with a hand that shook so badly the signature looked forged. But it was real as the pregnancy, as real as the DNA that wouldn't lie even when everyone else did. The baby was born on a Tuesday in June at a private hospital where Sheikh Tariq's money ensured the best care and complete discretion. Hassan was present, playing the role of excited father with more genuine emotion than anyone expected. Sheikh Tariq appeared briefly as family friend, holding his biological daughter for exactly 3 minutes while nurses took photos he'd later keep in a locked drawer. She was named Amira, meaning princess in Arabic, chosen by Maria in a moment of dark irony. A princess whose royal blood would never be acknowledged. A princess raised in international cities' cramped apartments while her biological father lived in Emirates Hills luxury. The trust fund was established exactly as promised, administered by trustees who determined what expenditures were appropriate for the child's welfare. Medical care, education, and basic living expenses were covered, but requests for anything the trustees deemed excessive were denied, ensuring Maria remained dependent on Sheikh Tariq's benevolence while never having enough freedom to escape. Hassan proved to be a better father than biology would have provided. He woke for midnight feedings that weren't his responsibility. He changed diapers with matter-of-fact efficiency. He sang Urdu lullabies that made Amira smile, her tiny hand gripping his calloused finger with trust he hadn't earned through genetics but was earning through presence. "You didn't have to do this," Maria told him one night, watching him rock Amira back to sleep. "You're being more than the contract required." "The contract made me a legal father," Hassan replied. "But I chose to be an actual father. There's a difference." The arrangement continued for 18 months, a delicate balance of lies and truth that functioned as long as everyone played their assigned roles. Sheikh Tariq visited monthly, always when Hassan was working, spending an hour with Amira while Maria watched with a mixture of resentment and exhaustion. He brought expensive gifts that the child was too young to appreciate, took photos he couldn't display, and left with the satisfied air of someone whose problem had been successfully managed. But lies this elaborate require perfect maintenance, and human beings are imperfect by nature. The unraveling began when Sheikh Layla, suspicious since the pregnancy revelation, hired a private investigator to dig into Maria and Hassan's marriage. The investigation revealed the rushed timeline, the lack of prior relationship, the immediate aftermath of employment changes. Most damning, it uncovered financial records showing Sheikh Tariq's payments to Hassan that far exceeded normal employment compensation. Sheikh Layla confronted her husband with evidence that couldn't be explained away. The affair she'd suspected, the pregnancy she'd heard about, but the elaborate cover-up, the forced marriage, the ongoing financial arrangements, these revelations transformed her understanding of betrayal. "You created a child with a servant," she said, her voice cold with a fury that had been simmering for months. "Then you forced her to marry your driver to hide your shame, and you've been visiting this child, playing father in secret while denying your own daughter's proper attention. Sheikh Tariq attempted explanations that sounded hollow even as he spoke them. But Sheikha Layla was beyond accepting justifications. "I want a divorce," she announced. "Full custody of our children, half of everything you own, and I want that woman and her child deported immediately so I never have to think about them again." The divorce proceedings were vicious, playing out in family courts where wealth determined outcomes but public scandal affected everyone. Details leaked to Dubai's gossip networks, then to social media, then to international news outlets that loved stories about Gulf excess and exploitation. Emirati sheikh father's child with maid forces sham marriage to hide paternity, read one headline. Dubai's dark secret, how domestic workers are exploited by employers, read another. The attention was catastrophic for everyone involved. Sheikh Tariq's business relationships suffered as associates distanced themselves from scandal. His family name, once synonymous with respectability, became associated with exploitation and deception. His children faced bullying at school, learning about their father's affair through classmates' taunts rather than private family conversations. For Maria, the exposure was equally devastating. Her face became associated with housemaid who seduced employer, the narrative framed to make her the predator rather than victim. Filipino community groups distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with someone who reinforced negative stereotypes. Job opportunities vanished as no one wanted to employ someone whose story had become international news. Hassan faced immediate visa revocation, his employment terminated as fallout from the scandal. He was given 30 days to leave the UAE, his years of service rendered irrelevant by association with controversy. And Amira, barely 18 months old, became the physical embodiment of a scandal she'd never chosen. Her existence documented in news articles and social media posts that would follow her forever. The final meeting happened in a lawyer's office. All parties present with legal representation, negotiating the terms of how to disentangle lives that had been forced together. Sheikh Tariq made a final offer, 5 million dirhams, $1.36 million USD, deposited in an offshore account Maria could access, in exchange for her permanent departure from the UAE with Amira, absolute non-disclosure about his paternity, and agreement that he would have no further contact with or legal responsibility for the child. "You're buying silence," Maria said, "paying me to disappear so you can pretend Amira never existed." "I'm providing for my daughter's future while protecting my family's present," Sheikh Tariq replied. "Take the money, raise her well, and let everyone move forward with their lives." Maria looked at Amira, playing quietly with Hassan's watch chain, oblivious to the conversation determining her future. She thought about the alternative, staying in the UAE with no job and no prospects, or returning to the Philippines with no money and permanent scandal attached to her name. The choice wasn't really a choice. It never had been. She signed the papers, took the money, agreed to the terms. Within a week, Maria and Amira were on a flight to Manila, returning to poverty less absolute than what they'd fled but carrying wealth that came at the cost of truth. Hassan returned to Karachi, his years in Dubai ending in deportation rather than dignified retirement. Sheikh Tariq remained in Emirates Hills, his wealth slightly diminished but his power intact, his daughter reduced to a legal fiction whose existence he could deny whenever convenient. The marriage certificate remained legally valid but functionally irrelevant. The birth certificate listed Hassan Ahmad as father, a lie that would define Amira's legal identity forever. The DNA results remained buried in medical databases, accessible but never examined. And Sheikh Tariq's paternity became a secret maintained through money, legal threats, and the fundamental inequality that allowed wealthy men to erase their mistakes, while poor women carried permanent consequences in their arms.